Ed Music is flying air show demonstrations. So World War I, when the United States enters World War I in 1917, he joins the Marines, but is assigned as an instructor. They won't let him go to France because he's too valuable. Because who else has the that amount of experience flying at that point in time? Hardly anyone. So after the war, he's determined to do his part to make aviation a going concern, and flies with a lot of the early airlines, and ultimately makes his way to Pan Am, and it's really a match made in heaven, and really pioneers these routes and new techniques, and trains the pilots, and so that by the time 1938, he has a 25 years of experience as a pilot, uh, and has flown more than 1 million miles at a time when most people on the planet had hardly ever seen a plane, much less been up in one. Um, but it's important to remember that he wasn't the only person on that plane, and there were 6 others who were all just as important, and to their families were the most important people in the world. And if we can do something to find them, to learn about their fate and what happened to them, and bring closure to those families, and to the wider the Pan Am family, and the aviation community as well. I think that's very important. It's something that jumps out when you're doing the archival research on this, even though it's kind of dusty old papers and archives. The emotions of those days, are really preserved in those words and those documents. I remember seeing the radio traffic between the Pan Am personnel in Pongo Pongo, and the headquarters back in San Francisco, and going back and forth, and as they're trying to piece together what's happened when they lose contact with the airplane, and urging each other to we need all possible good thinking, and know you'll handle this, and sending out search parties, and then finally getting the word, and or discovering, confirming what had happened, that their worst fears had been realized, and the wording in the telegram, or the radiogram that was sent to all stations is, it is with inexpressible regret that we confirm the loss of NC-34 and its entire crew. This was not strictly a business. It was family, and they had lost 7 of their own. It was the worst accident up to that time for Pan American. Unfortunately, it would not be the last, but it was felt very, very keenly, and that still echoes down to today. The airline had another 50 years of operation, and built up a extraordinary loyalty, and among people who felt that they were really advancing the world, and bringing people closer together, and they still to this day take enormous pride in their role in doing that, and regard this as again as their family, and we are going to do our very best to find out what happened to them.
Absolutely. And I, when I'm based in San Francisco, and I had the pleasure of going to the SFO Museum, which is in the airport actually, in SFO, and it, kind of details the history of flight, and they have a great archive section there, and I read, some of the captain's logs of people who had met Ed Music and the crew, and they spoke really fondly of them, and One of them said that he put Ed Music in his own captain's quarters because it was such a treat to host him. So it really, their sort of pull in the both in the air and the sea industries, right, was huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And the SFO museum, yeah, is a real gem. I had a chance to visit there too, and it's kind of unexpected, that it's this world class uh, cultural institution housed in an international airport, and they take great pride in the fact that Pan American, the Pacific Division was based there in San Francisco, and they do a great job of interpreting that flying boat era. They have a continuing exhibit on the China Clippers that includes articles related to the S-42s and the other Pan Am aircraft, the Martin M130 and the Boeing 314, but and a lot of great just preserved items that you see, like with the kinds of things that the crew interacted with, and navigational instruments and China that was served on board the flights, and all kinds of documents and uh, and photographs and things related to air transport and especially the Pacific aviation.
Yeah, and kind of jumping off of this, that notion that you said this is a huge journey, right? This trans-Pacific leg. Even in 2019, I flew to Samoa from SFO, and it took around 30 hours, yeah, around 30 hours, which is sort of just speaks to the how vast and what a massive trip this is. And we all, the PSYOPs team for this leg, had the opportunity to fly from Samoa to Pongo Pongo, American Samoa, and how incredible was it to fly along a very similar flight path, seeing what the crew may have very well seen in their day.
Yeah, that flight. We were in an unpressurized aircraft, so it was very comparable to the experience that the crew would have had flying in Samoan Clipper. And so you stay, fairly low, and you see the world passing by, and we flew over just the spectacular, natural beauty of Samoa and Apia, and then across the ocean, to Tutuila in American Samoa, and passed by the western tip, and as you looked out the window, you could see Tapu Tapu Point, the westernmost tip of Tutuila, and see the area beyond where we're operating now. And it's an amazing experience to fly. I had an opportunity to fly in a World War II era Navy patrol plane, a Lockheed PV-2D Harpoon that had been restored by the Stockton Field Aviation Museum, and we flew it across the country to the big air show. The Experimental Aircraft Association puts on a massive air show every year at Oshkosh, Wisconsin, called Air Venture, and that was a flight back in time. Went to travel along in this airplane, and the noise and the smells and the wind kind of whistling through, and the cold actually as you make your way into higher altitudes, and but what an amazing experience that would have been. I mean, it was today, but for people in the 1930s and the 1940s, when most travel would have maybe been by car or by rail, and to suddenly be whisked along at 150 miles an hour, and over overland and over water, and cutting journeys that would have been days or weeks into hours or a few days, just like a quantum leap forward, so it's yeah, it's an incredible era, and Samoan Clipper was and this crew were a big part of that.
Right, and that's something to think about in itself as well. We're not on these planes today where we have air conditioning and pressurization and,
Right.
comfortable seats. These are kind of loud and low flying aircrafts.
Oh yes, I mean you have four engines suspended right above your head. Actually, the way the Clipper was built was this very high wing mounted on a pylon or a cabane that stood on top of the fuselage, and that was actually to get the propellers clear of the water, when they were landing and takeoff. But it's just having like four airplanes in formation, close formation, right above you, and yeah, and the noise would be terrific, and the airplane is not pressurized, not really even airtight. I mean, there'd still be kind of wind whistling through the gaps, and the crew. So aviation historian John Hill was talking to me about this before we left, and was revealing a lot of really interesting stories about the crews of these airplanes, and how Pan Am would project this air of professionalism, and they because this was a new mode of transportation, and something that a lot of people still regarded as very risky, or just the domain of daredevils and stunt pilots, and so they wanted to project the air of stability and reliability, and so they fixed on something that people were familiar with and comfortable with, and that was steamship travel or ocean travel, and so they mimicked the appearance of, like, maritime, of merchant marine and naval service. So you got those really snappy blue uniforms with the white caps and the gold badges, and the planes themselves were referred to as flying clippers, and the clipper ships, were the legendary sailing vessels that would speed between the from the west to the east, to out to out to Asia, to bring back spices and silks and tea, and and so they wanted to project that idea of speed and reliability and comfort, and and sorry, I kind of lost. What was the original question?
I think we covered it.
Right.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's great. And I do, I know there's like so much information. I'm
Yeah.
sitting in front of this binder that you brought that is like just incredible. It's like an encyclopedia of Samoan Clipper.
Right. Right.
And I'm looking at this accident report, and you make a note that it's calculated in degrees and minutes and seconds, which somebody asked, how do we know where to look and what are we going off of? And you've pulled together, your team has pulled together these historical documents and archives and reports, as well as an eyewitness statement, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So when we first started the project, or really, so back to the beginning, uh, James Delgado, who was then the Director of Maritime Heritage for NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. This is about 5 years ago. Now he's a Senior Vice President at Search Inc., who are also our partners on this project. So he invited myself to join him in co-authoring some papers, proposing targets for exploration in the Eastern Pacific, at a workshop that was to be hosted by Ocean Exploration Trust in San Francisco. As it turns out, not very far and within sight of the old Clipper base on Treasure Island. But but yeah, so I knew at the time, I knew that something had happened to Pan Am's chief pilot, and that's really about all I knew at the time. And yeah, as I was embarrassed to say, like I didn't know that much about him until I started researching it, and um, so we had to go back to the beginning and find out what had happened, and and the story that we uncovered was just incredible. And I asked Lonnie Shore, who's with us out here now as well, um, to look into finding could we find the original accident report? Because we know this was an American transport aircraft that was lost in an American territory. Surely there'd been an investigation, and as it turns out, there really was a very thorough one. And it was almost a shock to realize that to turn to that first page, and right there they gave a reported loss position, but as you said, calculated down to degrees, minutes, and seconds. And so many times when you're talking about trying to locate a historic aircraft where the wreck is unknown, it has practically vanished off the face of the earth. I mean, the list is long. Earhart, Kingsford Smith, Ulm, Flight 19, all the way up to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, which had incidentally had only vanished about 2 months before we started this investigation. And yeah, you start reading these reports, and there was a bit of deja vu in reading the reports from 1938 at that time because the story was so familiar. You have an airliner missing in the Pacific, they lost radio contact, and search planes are dispatched to try and locate it, and where they want to direct ships to the scene to try and to find any trace of what happened. And the difference is that in this case, within a few hours, they had already spotted an oil slick and debris in the water. And by the next morning, they had a ship on site that was picking it up and realizing that this is not ocean trash. This is definitively pieces from Samoan Clipper. So there was a very precise point last seen in this instance, and gave us a real a real feeling that it was reasonable to think that with the technology that we can bring to bear, that the solution to this last piece of the puzzle is now within reach. But yeah, the specifics of what happened. So the last radio transmission comes in at just about 8:30 in the morning. The morning that Samoan Clipper had left for Auckland, and they were known to have returned. They were actually, so I'll back up. So an hour and 19 minutes out of Pongo Pongo, music reports that there's an oil leak in the number 4 engine, and he's shutting it down and returning to base. They did not want to continue on this 1,800-mile flight down to 3 engines from 4. So the next thing that happens, the plane is actually sighted over Apia, and what they deduce is that Music has taken the opportunity to overfly the harbor there and evaluate it as a potential alternate landing site. He was never really totally comfortable with the arrangements at Pongo Pongo because the approach and landing is so daunting and so challenging, even for a pilot of his abilities and his experience. The harbor is very restricted, and you have to come in. You can only approach from the north over this 800-foot ridge and then drop very steeply for the water in order to land with enough space to spare. And they figured it was workable because normally the plane would arrive there at the end of a very long run and would be very light. They would have consumed the fuel on board. Well, they are loaded. They left with 2,300 gallons of gas to make this flight to Auckland, and they have only just started to burn into it. So by taking the opportunity to scout over a PIA, he's also using up some of that fuel. But that's only as you recall, like that's only about a 75-mile flight. So very very quick hop from there back to American Samoa, and that's where they were headed when they radio at 8:30 that or 8:27 to be exact. But they radio in that they're going to dump fuel because they need to lighten the airplane more, and that was also a maneuver that came with a bit of risk, and in this case, disastrously so. But so they knew right after 8:30 when the airplane did not come back on the air, and the radio operator had actually said he was shutting down the radio because they didn't want to risk a stray spark that might ignite the fuel vapors. But they never came back on the air, and the next word that reaches them is from the northwest coast of the island. People are saying they can look out and see smoke on the horizon, and so they know there's dire trouble. And the U.S. Navy had a ship stationed at Pongo Pongo, the USS Avocet, which was a minesweeper converted to a seaplane tender that actually had a seaplane assigned to it. I believe a Grumman J2F Duck. And the captain, Lieutenant Williamson of the Avocet, the commanding officer, was also the pilot. And when word reached that contact had been lost with Simone Clipper and smoke had been sighted to the northwest, he took off to go investigate what had happened, and spotted the oil slick and the debris in the water, and so they knew very quickly the area where this had happened, and they had a sense, of course, of what had befallen the crew, but they were very quickly on the scene, and so the next clue we have is in the deck log of the Avocet. Their orders, are at 1910 or just after 7 in the evening. The ship is noted as getting underway en route to a point 12 miles north of Tapu Tapu, Tutuila Island, in search of Samoan Clipper. So we don't have the whatever report or whatever orders specifically that Lieutenant Williamson issued to his crew, but within that document, they are proceeding to 12 miles north. So we assume that's exactly what he's instructed them to do. Lieutenant Williamson is not going to go out on Avocet. He is remaining as he's the only pilot, so he's basing the Duck at the Pan Am dock, and then sending his crew. He turns over the con to Chief Bogan to navigate the ship out to the area, and then he intends in the morning to get airborne again and overfly the area and see what else he can do to assist the search that way. So and you can track the progress of the Avocet as they leave Pongo Pongo, and we just retraced that route ourselves yesterday morning, where you sail. The harbor entrance to Pongo Pongo faces south, so you exit there and then turn to the west and make your way out around the end of the island around Tapu Tapu Point, and then it's an easy thing to line up and head due north, and that's another thing that gives you confidence in the estimates that they were making at the time, because you look at these sometimes. You look at an incident like this, and you get a reported loss position, but maybe the ship that records it has been at sea for weeks, navigating, just using celestial navigation and dead reckoning, and in this case, you have a landmass in sight. I mean, you can stand on the deck of Nautilus right now and look out and see Tapu Tapu Point clearly. And Lieutenant Williamson would have been airborne, so he could see the oil slick and the island at the same time, and make his estimates relative to that landmass. And remember, he's a naval aviator. His stock in trade is locating targets at sea and reporting them, and and he says 12 miles. He doesn't say 10. He doesn't say 15. He says 12. So he's very clear about where he believes this is located, and there would be an easy way to back up that estimate. All he has to do is, if he's orbiting the oil slick, point the nose of his plane at the end of the island, Tapu Tapu, and make a note of his compass heading, which is due south, and then take a look at his watch and see how long as he's returning to base, just fly directly from the oil slick over the tip of the island, and how long does it, estimate how long did it take him, and if it's 4 minutes and 40 seconds, given the cruising speed of the duck would be about 155 miles an hour, so 12 miles. So there's a good reason to think that they could be very, very accurate in their estimates, and we know that it worked in the sense that Avocet, using that as a guide, sailed out, and they arrived actually in the middle of the night. And so you see in the ship's log, they just sort of steam back and forth, north and south, waiting for the sun to come up. And at 5:50 in the morning, they note that they've commenced search for Samoan Clipper. Sunrise in this part of the world on that day would have been 6:04, and at 6:06 they record that they've spotted the oil slick. So Lieutenant Williamson's instructions to the crew put them on the scene, bang on. They were right on it immediately, at the start of the new day. And 31 minutes later, the log reports that they've spotted debris floating in the water, and then they launch the ship's boat and confirm that debris is definitively from Samoan Clipper. So we have we have those that information that was gathered, just within hours, within the first day of the loss. And the last piece of information that was really interesting to me, and it's preserved in the radio traffic that was sent at the time, and is now at the University of Miami libraries in a special collection there. But it reports that when Lieutenant Williamson lands, so Lieutenant Williamson takes off at dawn on the 12th, the day after the accident, and he overflies the scene while Avocet is out there, and scouts ahead to see what else he can find. But he lands back at Pongo Pongo 2 hours later, and reports that the oil slick as sighted yesterday appears to be coming from the ocean floor. And to me, that says logically what's happened is he's now observed that oil slick twice over the course of less than a day, and he hasn't. It's, if you would think that if it was just like a smear of oil that was left at the surface when the airplane impacted, that it would have drifted away and dissipated overnight. But he's come back the next day and it's still in the same place, or it seems like one end of it is fixed, and that would logically mean that it's being replenished by something, some source underwater. Presumably the tanks on board Samoan Clipper. Now, of course, the current and the wind would disperse that, but it would be forming more of a trail, leading away from the site of the origin. So so they have they would again have a very good idea of that area, and they were highly motivated to be precise. Again, in the message traffic, it comes in loud and clear that where the Pan Am executives say wish to exhaust every possibility to recover the plane and the crew. And they looked into everything. Could they get divers, down to the wreck? Could they drag for it using grapples and lines? And uh, they they calculated if they strung together every bit of line that was available on the naval base or at the naval station wharf at Pongo Pongo, it would reach to 3,000 feet. And even at the time, they had thought that the water depth here was 1,000 fathoms, which is 6,000 feet. And of course, it's, as we have discovered, it's really on the order of 3,000 meters. So for those in America, more like 9,000 feet. But it was just outside of their reach, and so they knew very very closely where this had happened, but just couldn't get that final step, and that's what this is allowing us to do. We now on this ship have the technology to reach down into those depths and maybe pull out those final answers. So yeah, so the of course, yes, we have a very precise starting location, but that doesn't take into account like what might have happened, to that oil is and fuel is rising to the surface, but what's happening to it in the water column as it's coming up, what currents and things are acting on it as it comes up, and you know so we have to feel we're close. It is somewhere nearby, but it doesn't. It would be very 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 unlikely that it turns up exactly where they recorded it to be, but it can't be far away.
And Russ, I have to say it's so impressive. For those of you viewing at home, you'll see our science back row on cam, and everything that's coming from you is totally off of memory. You're not reading notes. So to say that this has been a passion project as well is, I imagine, a little bit of an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and yeah, I mean, I personally have been studying it for 5 years, but I've had a lot of help. Some really amazing people have also given of their passion and their talent and their time and expertise. Starting with Lonnie and Dr. Delgado and author John Krupnick and the people at the Pan Am Museum Foundation, the people at the Pan Am Historical Foundation, the researchers at the Igor I. Sikorsky Historical Archives, the researchers at the University of Miami libraries, and so many more. Have really just thrown themselves into this and want to help write that final chapter in the story of Samoan Clipper. So and then everyone here on this ship is giving of their time and their expertise and their effort and passion as well for the ocean and ocean exploration, and have really, I think, taken the story of Samoan Clipper into their hearts as well. And so there's a lot of people on this ship, and and all around the world who are really, wanting to see the resolution come, and it's really only as a team effort that is at all possible. Um, it's really fitting that we are on this ship. I mean, the fact that um, the original motivation to begin this investigating this came when OET and NOAA called for people to suggest targets for exploration in the Eastern Pacific, knowing that NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer would be operating out here, and that Nautilus was going to be spending several years based in the Pacific, and that was quite an experience as well. That workshop, it wasn't just archaeologists. There were biologists and geologists and chemists, and where there were papers in all disciplines and areas of interest, and they get together, and Ocean Exploration Trust has really embraced technology and stays on the cutting edge of that, and incorporating these tools into our investigative process, and so they were able to take in those meetings, you could consolidate everything by region and by theme, and put it up on a screen and look and see where's the overlap, and start planning these missions, and where you can look for something, and there will be okay, there's a wreck here, and then if we transit to this area where there's a underwater volcano, we can map in that transit, we can map an unmapped section of the ocean floor, and and all of those disciplines also are supporting each other, and where there are people through telepresence, there are people who are on call. So it isn't just us here in the control van, or the people on the ship. It's everyone everywhere who are contributing. They if we're running like here, maybe we spot some new geologic formation that I wouldn't know the first thing about. But we'll have specialists that are watching, that would call attention to that, or maybe we spot a new species, or on another expedition, maybe they're exploring a seamount and come across an unknown wreck. So all of the things, all of the pieces support one another, and it's an amazing thing to be a part of it, and to watch, and it spreads even to the people watching this streaming on at home, and asking their questions, and and sharing their insights and their passion for the exploration. So it's 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 really an honor to be here in this spot, but just to be a part of the whole thing.
Absolutely. And, I'm looking at the map right now, and we have viewers, again, from all over the world, from the US and the UK, Canada, Turkey, Netherlands, Germany, Russia, New Zealand, Norway, Mexico, going down the list still, France, Finland, Denmark, Brazil, and Belgium. So it is really cool that, we can reach so many people, and so many of you can reach us and ask questions. Just doing a little recap of what we're doing here. So Argus is about a little more than 3,000 meters off of the ocean floor, conducting some side scan sonar. So we are looking for any sort of anomalies in the seafloor with that might indicate a human-made object. So that survey is expected to last for another day or so. And then once we've acquired targets using the side scan data, Argus may be lowered to get a visual. I mean, it is getting a visual here, but maybe a little bit more in depth to sort of characterize what we're looking at. And then Hercules will head down after that and do sort of more in-depth photography and videography of those targeted potentials afterwards. So it's a bit of strategy here. So, I mean, do we want to sort of talk about going back in what this side scan sonar does, what we're looking at? It's the sort of the yellow, brown, blacky map looking stuff for viewers at home. Dee Dee, do you want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing there?
Sure. Just to update everyone before I get into that, we've completed a line and we're letting Argus catch up a little bit, and the ship is starting to make a turn up to our next line, and in the process we're going to be going over to targets that were located over during the overnight shift. So the yellow screen that you're seeing is a waterfall from a side scan sonar. We're using an EdgeTech 4200 dual frequency side scan sonar. It can produce a 600 and 300 kilohertz signal. And this is an acoustic signal that is transmitted out from two transducers located on the frame of Argus. This sound wave travels down to the seafloor and bounces off and produces this waterfall image that you see in front of you. So the top one is the high frequency sonar, and the bottom is a lower frequency sonar. This allows us to have a acoustic image of anything that we might come across, and a good comparison right now from the video screen of Argus showing the rocks on a relatively muddy seafloor, and then as a comparison the acoustic image that you see produced by the side scan sonar of all of these rocks. What we are looking for is man-made objects. These could be right angles, straight lines, as well as the type of return that comes off of metal. So that produces a different look to make it easy than a geologic formation. So the ship is going to make its turn, and we will continue on our way.
And going back to sort of what our targets are and what we're looking for, Russ, do you just kind of want to dive into the logistics of the plane? How many engines and blades did it have? What was the size? What specifically are we looking for?
All right, so specifically, we're looking for a Sikorsky S-42B flying boat. It was had a wingspan of 118 feet and a length of 68 feet, and a height from the bottom of the keel to the top of the rudders of 21 feet. There were 4 Pratt & Whitney R1690 Hornet radial engines arrayed along the leading edge of the wing. It's a all metal construction, all aluminum, and with fabric covered control surfaces. We're thinking that the largest likely piece of the aircraft would be the wing. It's the strongest part of the airplane, described in the company literature as immensely strong, of two spar construction with stress skin, and also reportedly seen floating intact at the surface by the eyewitness before sinking from sight. So that would be a very that would be a large object with a long straight edge. That normally straight edges don't occur very often in nature. And then with the if the engines are still attached, those are each a half ton apiece, a 11-foot propeller arc, 3-bladed Hamilton standard propellers. You know, the supposition is that the aircraft suffered an in-flight fire and explosion in the fuselage tanks. There were tanks, extra auxiliary fuel tanks mounted inside the hull, inside what would have normally in the airliner configuration would have been passenger accommodations in compartment D. But Samoan Clipper was specially modified as a long-range survey plane, and so they had extra 6 225-gallon fuel tanks arranged within the cabin, just aft of the special navigator's position. So with an explosion at that point, weakening the structure of the airplane, you might expect that the cockpit section and the tail section might have also separated and would be presenting potential targets as well. Talking with Mike Brennan about this, who is really our top expert in this field and has spent a lot of time looking for and finding a lot of amazing artifacts at the bottom of the ocean. A lot of that career spent with Ocean Exploration Trust and on this ship, so he is very familiar with its capabilities and what we're trying to do, and has used these same techniques to find ancient shipwrecks and others, and so he was talking to me last night just about how we're seeing a lot of objects here in the sonar return, but it's right now very most of them, except for about 13 of them, I think, look entirely consistent with natural features that fortunately we're able to confirm in a lot of instances by watching the center camera here on Argus. But yeah, it was Mike's feeling, based on some pretty extensive experience and knowledge that structures like what made up Samoan Clipper will stand out, from this background. That they will be more regular in shape, and the return will be stronger, will be brighter than the surrounding rocks and geology. So that's what we're looking for.
And we're currently operating at a depth of a little over 3,100 meters. And a few people have asked, is there a potential for parts of the aircraft to maybe be impacted by pressure at this depth, maybe the wings or the engine?
Well, yeah, Dee Dee, do you want to address that?
Sure. The pressure wouldn't necessarily affect it per se, but the falling of those objects down to the seafloor is what we're considering. It's a long way down from the surface of the water. You wouldn't have anything imploding per se, but you could have more of a scatter field based upon just the sheer the amount of water from surface to the seafloor.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just in October on some World War II wrecks in the Marshall Islands, and we were diving actually because the deepest depth there is about 120 feet. And on that deep wreck, I did notice in the instance of the horizontal tail, there must have been what are like void spaces in there, created when the aluminum skin is riveted on top of the metal frame structure, and there was a slight deformation to the upper surfaces of the horizontal tail that could only, we suppose or hypothesize that there was air trapped in those spaces, that it would have gone down nose heavy with the tail in the air and then sunk down, and perhaps that there was still air trapped in those spaces and were just crushed in a little bit, but no, this isn't like a submarine. It's not going to be like a catastrophic implosion. that you might see in a case like that.
And the plane was quite heavy too. I mean, each propeller was around a half ton, correct? So do we have sort of an idea of maybe how the aircraft would have sunk in general based on that?
Well, each engine actually was a half ton. The propellers, I'm not actually sure of the weight of the propellers themselves, but yeah, I mean yeah, I'm not sure how much I mean, because once it's in the water column, I don't know how much the weight of it is going to.
Yeah, I'm not
affect.
sure. I mean, the wing, with the structure of the wing itself and the 4 engines, are pretty considerable.
Yeah.
Especially if it was intact, like the eyewitness accounts say, that it went down fairly intact. So that's a pretty large object with some weight. So that's a good thing for us that we're going to hopefully find that on the seafloor.
And in this part of the expedition, we are just using Argus and not Hercules. Does one of our ROV pilots maybe want to dive into why using Argus? What's kind of specific and unique about Argus and not using Hercules?
Sure, I'll take that one. So Argus allows us to use a side-scanning sonar, but we can also use it as a tow slug. So this allows us to do that lawnmower pattern that we're doing right now so that we can get that first survey of the area.
And then once we do have those potential targets marked, the plan is to send Hercules and Argus back down and do a little bit more in-depth exploration. So it's again, it's super cool to see, just how many people tune into this and are as excited about this work as we are. So I wanted to just highlight, we do have some viewers coming in from American Samoa. So hey guys, Australia, Belgium, Chile, Denmark, Finland, France, Norway, New Zealand, Uruguay, Russia, Turkey, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, the UK, and the US. So it is, very exciting to see the world wake up with us. And we are in search of the Samoan Clipper. So for those of you that are just joining us or maybe haven't heard the story yet, the Samoan Clipper was a Pan American Airways plane. It exploded and crashed into the sea just northwest of Pongo Pongo, American Samoa on the 11th of January in 1938. So we do have Argus scanning the seafloor right now using a side scan sonar. Argus will send back that data, and then our team is pinpointing any sort of anomalies along the bottom of the ocean, so things that might look to be a human-made object or indicative of an aircraft. And then in the next day or so, maybe two, we'll send Hercules down as well to explore those pinpoints in further detail and see if it is, in fact, the Samoan Clipper. So the Samoan Clipper was a 4-engine S-42B flying boat. It was built by Sikorsky Aircraft Corporation, and the flying boat was built as a way to access parts of the world that maybe were otherwise inaccessible just based on landing strips. So it could land on the water, and we had the privilege of being at port in Pongo Pongo at the harbor there where the the Samoan Clipper, excuse me, had landed. And Russ, that was a pretty impressive landing area. I mean, the plane would come over this steep ledge and then have to land in a very thin sort of channel, right? I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's something to stand in that spot and contemplate what Music was facing every time he landed there. And I actually had the opportunity to come out here in December of 2016, just because I was just drawn to it. I wanted to see it. I wanted to kind of walk the ground and see where it had all happened. And I took the opportunity not only to stand on the alongside the shoreline at the where Nautilus was tied up, just before departure, but also hiked the trail to the top of Mount Alava and looked down on the harbor. And you can really appreciate, when you do that from that perspective, like what he was facing and why they had chosen it. I mean, a big flying boat like that, needs calm water to land in, and so the natural harbor at Pongo Pongo provides that, in that it's essentially shaped like a boot, where the foot or the sole of it is the inner harbor and is sheltered and very calm, but that comes at a price, in that it's sheltered by these spectacular towering mountains, which are stunningly beautiful, but also incredibly hazardous for a pilot. So the only way to approach for Music was to come in from the north and pass over an 800-foot ridge, which was still the lowest elevation available, and come over and then dive immediately for the water and flare out and try to land in the confines of that calm water. And you could really feel it when we left. Was it yesterday morning? Yes. Yeah, when we left.
Right.
And made that turn out to sea, and then the swell started to lift the vessel, and where that would be a danger to a flying boat trying to land in heavy swells, and so it's it's something that Music, even with all his talent and his gifts, was always uneasy with using the harbor in that way, and it was really a temporary situation for them, in that they were waiting for the larger Boeing aircraft to come online, and then the route to New Zealand would have gone through Canton Island, and skip Kingman Reef altogether. And actually, I wasn't on board, but Nautilus made a stop at Kingman Reef on the way down here, and it'd be interesting to hear some people, if there was anybody on board that was there for that. But I know from the historical record that it's it is a reef. It's not really much of an island at all. Oh, our data logger's nodding her head. Can you tell us about Kingman Reef?
It was really a very steep reef structure.
Is there much visible above the surface?
Not really. No,
Right.
no.
Yeah, I remember Pan Am had to station a ship at that spot to refuel and reposition the Samoan Clipper on its way down. So that was never going to be the permanent solution. But they had these longer range, bigger planes coming online, and that would divert through Canton Island, which has it's an atoll with a sheltered lagoon in what's now Kiribati, and then on their way back down to Auckland. Though I think they're